cumulative as you get from 192 to 2. Providing 3 4, rank 2 and Blood Mastery, this perk will provide this back up to rank 3 of this perk and then weapon-based perks, and I'd say you should be good. Character, Strong Back might be a good perk to pick up. If you acquire it level 10, you get another 25 for a total of 50. Together a strength build, Strong Back will go well with additional investment in strength to further improve your overall carry weight lot. Rank 3 at level 20 allows you to use action points to run. Rank 4 at level 30 allows you to potentially fast travel, which is really useful, and if you have the Far Harbor DLC, you can get a rank 5 to max this perk out. You may find rank 4 is really nice to have, as the ability to fast travel can quickly get you to somewhere like Sanctuary, or even your other settlements, to dump a lot of the excess stuff you're carrying. Honestly, I think you can't go wrong with Strong Back. If you've got 6 strength already for your build, or if you have 4 or 5 strength and you're willing to put additional points into the stats, I'd say it's definitely worth it to do so, as the improved carry weight is always good regardless of your build. Number 5, Awareness. So what Awareness does is pretty simple, as it shows the player both the resistances the target has, as well as their level while that is active. Thus, it can allow players to potentially determine how strong or difficult an enemy will be to take down. As you might imagine, this would be a really good perk for beginners, due to the fact that Awareness essentially allows you to see how strong a given enemy is before taking them on. What also makes this perk ideal is the fact that it's essentially 1 point, provided you don't have the DLC, and can be acquired extremely early on, as long as you have 3 perception. So the requirements to actually get this perk are pretty low, and provided you actually do have the DLC, you can rank this perk up again for some additional accuracy and damage bonus while it passes. Otherwise, there's not really a whole lot else to this perk, and if you want it, just be sure to pick it up as soon as your next level up. Number 4, Action Boy and Action Girl. So this perk is pretty straightforward, as it improves the action point regeneration of your character. The first rank provides 25% faster AP regen and has no level requirements, while rank 2 can be acquired at level 18 and provides 50% faster AP regen, and provided you have the Far Harbor DLC, rank 3 of Action Boy or Girl can achieve as much as 75% faster AP regen, so you will need to be at least level 38 to make it work. Now, the reason this perk is useful is because action points are used fairly often in Fallout 4 regardless of build. After all, everything from using bats to sprinting, using jetpacks, or even using bash or power attacks consumes action points. Thus, it stands to reason being able to regenerate your action points faster is of great benefit to the player. With this said, I will admit that this perk does tend to work better provided the player has a higher amount of action points. After all this perk really does is improve the regeneration rate, and the more action points you have, the more AP you can agility, stamina, and fun. Number 3, Scrapper. The Scrapper perk is a great perk that simply allows you to get more resources from scrapping items. It requires 5 intelligence, and at rank 1 and 2, it allows the player to retrieve more uncommon resources when scrapping weapons and armor. For example, you'll be able to get things like aluminum, screws, copper, circuitry, nuclear material, and fiber optics when scrapping weapons, where before you might just get some steel or other very common crafting components. Obviously, having access to some of these rare components is very useful, since a lot of modifications typically require some of the rarer or more uncommon components. Beyond weapons and armor, though, Scrapper will allow you to retrieve more common components from scrap settlement objects as well, which can be really useful since certain settlement objects don't normally allow the player to retrieve any resources when they're scrapped. Ultimately, I think this is the perk you're going to want, so be sure to pick it up once you've got your weapon and other crafting-based perks sorted out. Number 2, Fortune Finder and Grounder. So both of these lock perks together should make it a lot easier to find more bottle caps and ammo in containers. Additionally, both these perks should be fairly easy to get, as they require minimal investment in the luck stat, with Fortune Finder only really requiring 1 luck, and Scrounger requiring 2 luck. Both these perks also scale at about the same rate too, with Blink 2 being acquired between level 5 and 7, rank 3 being acquired between level 24 and 25, and rank 4 being acquired between level 37 and level 40. Speaking of rank 4 Enforcement Finder provides the player with the ability to instantly have enemies explode into a shower of caps upon defeating them. It's not much, but in combination from the other benefits from Enforcement Finder, you should find you can accumulate caps a lot faster. In general, though, both of these perks are pretty simple and straightforward and should be helpful really early on, since a lot of vendors will usually have really high prices and stockpiling certain ammo types can be really difficult. So I'd say regardless of your build, both of these perks would be a really great choice if they are taken really early on. And finally, number 1, Locksmith. While I suppose you can rely on a companion to pick locks for you, Locksmith is a highly recommended perk that I recommend you get, since it's going to allow you to access a bunch of areas and containers that wouldn't normally be accessible. By level 7 and with proper perk points investments, you'll be able to pick up to expert locks, and you'll be able to pick master locks by level 18, thus allowing you to pick just about any lock in the game. I also recommend Locksmith over other perks due to how there are simply a lot more locks in this game when compared to hackable terminals. There are also plenty of instances where you can either hack a terminal or pick a lock, and obviously being able to simply just pick the lock is a lot more practical. Beyond rank 3 though, I think Locksmith's usefulness is debatable. Not only is the level requirement for rank 4 really high, but there's a really good chance that you have a bunch of bobby pins by the late game already. So while the ability to not have a bobby pin break is nice and it prevents resets, I also think you certainly can get by without it. Overall though, Locksmith is a great perk to pick up for all players of all levels, so just be sure to have a perception stat of 4 and you should be good. Alright guys, thank you all for watching another Fallout 4 video, and today I'd like to talk about what I think is the best special stat distribution for when you start a new character. Now, as a quick disclaimer, it is worth mentioning that there are a lot of different ways you can configure your starting special stats. A big part of what you ultimately end up doing is going to be determined by what types of weapons you want to use, as well as just how far you want to play through the game. After all, you're probably going to want to allocate your starting special a little bit differently for a melee character versus a ranged weapon character, and someone who's going to want to get all 11s in their special stats will play a lot differently than someone that plans on just stopping at level 60 or whatever. With all this in mind, I've actually put together 3 different special stat distributions because of this. So if you like melee builds, ranged builds, or even if you plan on playing until you get 11 in every special, we'll be going over how to do all of that here. Otherwise guys, let's just go ahead and start here by talking about all the special stats and then work our way to what I think are some of the best starting stat allocations. So in Fallout 4, we have 7 stats corresponding to each letter in the word special, with S for strength, P for perception, E for endurance, C for charisma, I for intelligence, A for agility, and L for luck. Some of these stats are more important than others, with some being really good to have high allocation in early on, while most others tend just to be used later on. Of all 7, I think the best special to pump early is intelligence, as a higher intelligence stat will increase the amount of experience points you earn from completing a given task. More specifically, each level in intelligence improves XP gains by 3%, meaning you can get 30% more XP at 10 intelligence versus just 3% more at 1 intelligence. While that might not sound like a big deal, as you're gaining 103% XP at 1 intelligence versus 130% at 10 intelligence, the effects of this will definitely add up over time and will allow you to gain new levels faster than you would with a lower intelligence stat. After all, performing 3 actions that normally yield 100 XP will yield 309 XP at 1 intelligence and 390 XP at 10 intelligence. After that, the bonuses for everything else are awarded based on the level of the stats, meaning pumping your special into these areas essentially yields the same amount of bonus at both early and later levels. For example, 4 agility means you will always have about 100 action points regardless of your level, while 10 strength will pretty much always yield a carry weight of 300. Because of that, I would argue you don't really need to put as many points into these initially unless you want easier access to specific perks earlier on. After all, you can get the bonuses most of these specials provide later on anyway. Ultimately, and as far as starting special stats go, I think intelligence is the most important one, while the rest can usually be picked up or invested in more heavily later on. Since that's the case, what I would recommend is that you take into consideration what kinds of perks each individual special stat can offer you. Typically, and in most cases, many of the best perks for each tree can be had within the first 5 ranks. For example, Strength's first 5 perks include Iron Fist, Big Leagues, Armorer, Blacksmith, and Heavy Gunner, while the first 5 in Perception include Pickpocket, Rifleman, Awareness, Locksmith, and Devilish Experts. For everyone that has played Combat 4 extensively, you'll know that all of these are pretty great and useful perks in their own right, and most of the trees tend to be like this. So we'll go over each in a little bit more depth. Starting with Strength, I think you'll find that for the vast majority of character types and builds, you're probably not going to need any of the perks beyond either Armorer or Heavy Gunner and Strong Back. This is because pretty much all characters are going to need Armorer at some point, and if you do decide to use heavy weapons, you can always just allocate points to get Heavy Gunner. Beyond that, Strong Back is a good perk, Steady Aim is mostly just okay, and Basher, Rooted, and Pain Train are all more melee-centric. So you shouldn't have to go past the first 5 perks in Strength. The same thing goes for Perception too. Pickpocket is nice for these builds. Rifleman is actually a really great perk, and is possibly the best weapon type perk in the game due to it ignores armor. Awareness is great for revealing damage resistances and bats. Locksmith is essential for picking locks, and Demolition Expert is a great perk to boost grenades and pretty much any gun with an explosive effect or damage opponent. So really, I'd say you can't really go wrong with any of these first 5 perks. However, unlike Strength, it is worth noting that Concentrated Fire, Sniper, and Penetrator can all be good for ranged and rifle users. So investing here later on could prove to be quite useful. As for Endurance's first 5 perks are sort of hit or miss, with perks like Chem Resistance and Life Giver being fairly decent, while Lead Belly and Aqua Boy and Aqua Girl are significantly less so. Toughness makes more sense if you're not using power armor, but at a maximum of only 50 damage resistance, you may find you can more easily achieve that through other means or by just wearing more armor. Some of the other perks in this tree are okay, like Adamantium Skeleton, but otherwise you can probably get by without most of them. Charisma is sort of in the same boat as Endurance, with Cap Collector, Lady Killer / Black Widow, and Lone Wanderer all being great. Charisma and Girl will be useful for those that are using in-game alcohol-based consumables. After that, most of the other perks are based on pacification of specific creatures and enemies, which I think you can do without, while Inspirational, in my opinion, is a good perk, but requires a lot of investment in the Charisma tree in order to get it. This brings us to the Intelligence tree, which honestly, I think almost every perk here is of fairly high quality, with maybe the exception of Nerd Rage and maybe Vance if you don't have the equal OPSC. Typically, I like to get Gun Nuts, Scrapper, Science, Chemist, and Nuclear Physicist here, with Robot Expert and Medic being nice choices as well. Hacker is largely outperformed by Locksmith from Perception, but does have its occasional uses. The Agility tree is also great, and that the first 5 perks are Gunslinger, Commando, Sneak, Mr. Sandman, and Action Boy or Girl. While the first 4 perks are more catered towards like pistol and automatic users or people that like to use stealth and power armor, there's no denying that they are good perks. As for Action Boy, that's useful for pretty much every character, and with higher agility investments, you can get perks like Ninja, Blitz, and Death Food, which are all phenomenal in their own right. Finally, we have the Luck tree, and sort of like Intelligence, pretty much every perk here is really good. While Idiot Savant will be a lot less useful with higher intelligence, perks like Fortune Finder, Scrounger, and Bloody Mess are all great perks. I'm sort of lukewarm on Mysterious Stranger, but it's pretty good too. Then of of course, you have the highly desirable critical banker perk, which allows you to basically store up to 4 additional critical meters, and 4-leaf clover, which will essentially fill a crit meter when you're normally using bats. Even Grim Reaper Sprint and Ricochet are pretty nice perks, so it might be worth picking them up as well. Overall though, if I had to rank each special tree in terms of the number of quality perks they have for most players' setups and builds, I'd have to say Intelligence and Luck would be near the top, with Strength, Perception, and Agility being towards the middle, and Endurance and Charisma being towards the bottom. This isn't to say Endurance and Charisma are bad per se, but I think there are more perks in these trees that are less necessary, and in the case of specific perks like Taco Boy and Lead Belly, are just less useful when compared to the other trees. So high investment in these stats would be more predicated on achieving the bonuses the individual stats themselves provide. And like I mentioned earlier when saying that you essentially get the same bonuses from most special stats at lower and higher levels, you may find you can get away with lower investments in these stats at the start of the game, and then eventually level them up later. Now at this point, then, since we've gone over the special stats themselves and many of the perks they can provide depending on your investment in them, I think we're at a point where we can start to talk about stat point allocations. If you're someone that's fairly new to Fallout 4, or if you plan on getting all of your special stats to 11 to maximize the potential of your character, I would recommend a stat point allocation that looks a little like this, with Strength at 2, Perception at 4, Endurance at 3, Charisma at 2, Intelligence at 9, Agility at 4, and then Luck at 4. To explain my rationale here, I'm taking into account that you're going to be using armor. Not only will the 9 intelligence allow you to get nuclear physicists right out of the gate, which will make your fusion cores last longer, but you can also get by with having a lower strength value, as power armor will bring your special stat to 11 while you are wearing it. Thus, you can achieve the passive bonuses having higher strength would provide, like better melee damage and carry weight, without quite as much investment in the strength stat. Plus, if you level up strength just once from 2 to 3, that will allow you to get the armor perk, which will be the most useful perk in the strength tree for the vast majority of builds. As for our other low investments, which is in Charisma, I think it's worth considering that you really only need 11 Charisma, and that you don't necessarily need 11 Charisma all the time. At 11 Charisma, you will have a 100% chance to pass red speech checks, provided you're wearing clothing or you take consumables that boost your charisma. Achieving 11 charisma to pass any speech check in the game should be pretty easy. As this applies to bartering, perks like Cat Collector and specific in-game items like the Barter Bobblehead and the Junktown vendor magazines will allow you to get better prices for buying and selling at those lower charisma levels. That said, maybe level up Charisma once or twice as a good cushion to make reaching 11 Charisma from outfits and gems a little bit easier, but otherwise, I think you'll find you'll be okay with 2 Charisma to start and then maybe 3 to 6 Charisma later on, depending on what perks you want. As for our largest investment, which is in Intelligence, not only will this help you level faster, but it will more easily let you get your intelligence to level 11 or 12, and it will let you get pretty much all of the best perks from the intelligence tree, of which there are many, as nuclear physicist, MS, scrapper, science, and gun nut are all very useful, while robotics expert and medic, and even rank 2 advanced are pretty decent. Just be sure to have a Dirty Wastelander, the Intelligence Bobblehead, and your special book for this one, as you'll need all 3 to hit 12 intelligence per maximum XP gain before any stat boosting gear or consumables. Otherwise, a lot of our allocation here is pretty balanced with perception, agility, luck, and endurance, all being in the 3 to 4 range. 4 perception lets you get locksmith, which will be incredibly useful at all stages of the game, while 4 luck will still let you get Scrounger, Fortune Finder, and Bloody Mess, which are all great perks. By simply leveling both agility and endurance by 1, you can access Action Boy and Girl for
That's right there. Right there? I haven't seen it. He's gonna play something.
Right there.
Oh! Wow, is that slick looking, eh? Play something. What are you playing?
Right here.
What is that?
My hockey game.
Oh, wow. Can I just see a little bit of it, of the game? What it looks like?
It's just on PS4.
Okay.
I have a PS4.
Oh my god, that is so beautiful. Sweet.
Box.
Wow. I don't remember David's looking that nice. Does David's look that nice? Wow. You're so spoiled. Oh, I love this duo thing you got going on. That's so cool. You're pretty smart to set that all up like that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Why are you here again?
I'm not sure. Not sure. days at the other place. But I asked Jesse, so what's happening is, right now we're 5 to Sunday to Thursday, like 7 to 3. And it's changing because the line that I'm working, I'm actually supposed to be working Thursday afternoons. And Saturday shift, that means I'll have to work Thursday nights and I don't want to. So I asked Jesse today, is it possible? Because there's this guy that works there right now, he works Thursday nights. And I said, could I get a day shift at Alexander instead? That's why I was working for 4 days. And then I'm here on Thursday day. And that guy was doing Thursday nights. So I asked her. So I would like that. I miss you guys. Yeah. I miss hanging out with you guys. I had such a really, I was deep. Anyways, I'm glad I did. Yeah, there's so much to see everyone.
get the Chemist perk, which is great for using chems and has great synergy with luck, in particular being a high priority to get critical banker, and so you can boost the rate to fill your critical meter a lot faster. In general, I think you'll find this setup will allow you to have a decent amount of choice over what range weapons you want to use while ensuring you gain levels as fast as possible. However, now, I would like to go over a modified version of this that can serve as a nice alternative if you don't mind using bubbleheads earlier, ensuring you won't level certain special stats beyond 10. So as you can see here, our layout is going to be fairly similar to the last setup, with the major difference revolving around the luck and intelligence stats. At 6 slots, you can acquire better critical from the start, and with an additional level up via plug points, you will then get critical banker, which will be very useful for that. As for our intelligence rank of 7, this will still let you get chemist, scrapper, science, and gun nuts, and while I would also recommend you still level intelligence up to get nuclear physicist for power armor use, 7 intelligence will cover most of your bases. Now earlier on in this video, I recommended you level up a number of special stats with strength, endurance, perception, and agility being really good candidates due to how you can get armor, gun resistant, demolition expert, and action boy or girl, respectively. However, it's worth mentioning that if you don't care about giving these specials to 11, you can always look for the bobbleheads for each of these specials, as that will free up the perk points you would normally spend to spend elsewhere. This is especially effective with strength, since you really only need 3, and could also be good for other special stats as well if you're looking to save your points and you just want the next perk up. So for example, maybe you want the demolition expert perk if you don't intend on going any further in perception, so you just get the perception bobblehead to unlock the perk. The same thing works for the year special book, which can be obtained super early on in Sanctuary. As for where to use it, it's really up to you, though I would probably recommend putting it in perception, agility, or luck, since these 3 are the most useful for boosting your combat abilities. Maybe you could go into endurance if you want to boost your health, but really, and again, it's up to you, since I usually just use your special book to earn a certain stat as well. Overall though, this setup is pretty similar to the last one and focuses more on luck, which should be good for VATS users. However, now I'd like to go over what would be my melee setup. Now obviously, I would like to go ahead and spec 9 into strength initially so we can reach 12 as soon as possible. However, you may find that you're going to be better off boosting your strength to 11 with power armor to improve the damage of your melee weapons, rather than forgo special stat allocation in other areas. Plus, if you're going to be doing a melee build and use power armor, it makes sense to put a few of the points into intelligence to more easily get to 9 intelligence so you can get the nuclear physicist perk, which will allow you to stay in power armor longer by more efficiently managing confusion for you. The low endurance stat can make the first few areas encountered a little more challenging for melee, but if you do manage to get power armor, you'll have a lot more resistances and you'll be able to take far more punishment from enemy attacks. If it really becomes an issue, you can always pick up the Life Giver perk to give yourself just a bit more health to improve your survivability. As for some of the other stat point allocations compared to my other specs, you're getting lower perception and agility here, which is unfortunate as you'll have to level these if you don't use perks. That said, if you don't care about maxing certain special, you could always grab the perception bobblehead near Preston and Concord to reach 4 perception, and then just level up agility if you want Blitz or other perks. Eventually, you want to get your strength stats up to 12 for maximum damage, as well as gain some perks that boost melee. But early on, you should be good at just 7 strength. Plus, and as an alternative damage method, you can always spec for heavy gunner to use things like the minigun and flamer early on, while using the Batman, missile launcher, and Gatling lasers later on. So if you're finding you're having issues dealing with enemies at a distance, doubling in heavy weapons could help you. In the end, I think you'll find the setup works fairly well and should allow you to get the most out of your melee weapons early on. Just be sure to keep an eye out for some big tripper and don't use your special book in Sanctuary so you can reach 12 strength. At the end of the day, I think you'll find all 3 of these special stat allocations should work out pretty well, as you can usually bypass the need for really high strength and endurance by using power armor. Charisma can be bypassed in favor of wearing certain pieces pieces of clothing and safety caps, which, after eliminating the need for high strength, should let you more easily focus on improving your other special stats. Otherwise, guys, I hope this video helped you, and I think I'm going to wrap this thing up here. If you liked this video, definitely be sure to leave a like, click the bell so you can be notified when I upload more videos, and
Our lives take us different places. Wherever yours takes you.
Hey guys, back with another Fallout 4 countdown video, and today I'd like to go over some of what I think are among the best bobbleheads and perk magazines in Fallout 4. Now, before we start, I'm mostly going to be avoiding collections and focusing more on single items. After all, one bobblehead has a hard time competing with the entire series of the Wasteland Survival Guide. With this said though, I will be including entire collections if they are compatible with the main item that I'm talking about. So for example, there are bobbleheads and perk magazines that do the same thing. Well, those things will be included together. However, without further ado, these will be the top 10 best bobbleheads and perk magazines in Fallout 4, starting now. Number 10, the Repair Bobblehead. Now, while this isn't the most powerful bobblehead on this list, this is a great bobblehead if you are a Power Armor user. Now, what this bobblehead does is it boosts fusion core duration by 10%, which is fairly useful when combined with the Nuclear Physicist perk for Power Armor. And I suspect this bobblehead was included for early game players, as fusion cores tend to drain very quickly when you first start out. However, towards the end game, it is nice to have that extra 10% fusion core duration. If you would like to obtain this one, you can find it at Corvega Assembly Plant on the exterior near the blue sphere with the Corvega logo. Now, the bobblehead is on a small stack of crates right in front of the lamp. And if you look at the pictures here, I think you'll have a fairly easy time finding it. Number 9, Total Hack Issue Number 1. Now, while you won't get to use this constantly, the ability to hack protectrons from the terminal can actually be very useful, especially in areas like subway stations, where you will usually find a terminal linked to a protectron pod for use as a slave. Now, the way this magazine works is that you read it, and this provides you with the source code for protectrons. And from this point, simply go up to a terminal with a protectron attached, get in, activate the protectron, and then just before you exit out of the terminal, be sure to load the override protectron holotape and select either override alliance parameters to make it your friend, or hijack EIPS source protocols to make it sort of like a companion. Or alternatively, you can choose disengage safety sensors and make it just shoot at everything. Again, while you won't use this thing all of the time, it is nice to have in a situation where you are near a protectron that is in one of those pods, and you have access to the terminal to hack it. Now, as for this thing's location, you will need to go to the Watts Consumer Electronics, and once inside, head to the very bottom through the big hole in the floor and go through one of the doors to get to a room with the door and the terminal. Simply access the terminals up the door, and the first issue of Total Hack should be right on the desk. Number 8, the Science Bobblehead. Now, while this isn't an incredibly amazing bobblehead, the Science Bobblehead is still fairly useful for those somewhat annoying hacking minigames that you have to perform, and this is because the Science Bobblehead will provide the player with an extra guess. So instead of getting 4 times to hack a terminal, you now actually get 5 times to hack a terminal. And this can prove to be quite useful for some of the more difficult terminals to hack, as that 5th additional time and make hacking advanced export or master terminals far easier. Now, in order to get to Science Bobblehead, you will need to go to the Malden Middle School, which is located in the northeastern part of the map and is very close to the Green Top Nursery Settlement. Now, underneath the middle school is Vault 75, and you're going to have to make your way through Vault 75. However, before you do that, make sure when you get to Vault 75 mission to go ahead in your Pip-Boy and set it to track. And once you've done that, you will need to obtain the lab access key, which is located on the top floor of the diner in the combat simulation area. And once you've got the key, open the first corresponding door, and then from here, you should come upon 3 doors, take one to the left, and keep going until you find an area with a gunner and a desk. So the gunners get the admin access card, and the bobblehead itself should be right there on the desk. Number 7, Scav issue number 2. So this is a fairly decent magazine if you're a melee user. However, if you're using power armor, I'm not really sure I can recommend this one, as it only provides a damage boost for the combat knife, switchblade, and disciple blade, all of which are weapons that end up attacking at their fastest, provided that the player is not wearing power armor. However, if you aren't using power armor or you just don't care, a 25% damage boost is fairly significant. And if you consider that Hickman's Blade and the Throat Slicer are fairly powerful weapons with the legendary wounding effect, you may want to go ahead and get this issue. To get this magazine, you'll need to go to the junkyard that's to the west of Yucatan, USA. And from there, enter the large warehouse and make your way to the upper floor. And once you're on the upper floor, just follow the path, kill the animatronic turret, and then go to the desk, and you should find issue number 2. Number 6, the lock-picking bobblehead plus the Tumblr Today perk magazines. So the lock-picking bobblehead does pretty much what you expect, and that is to make picking locks far easier. And like the science bobblehead, this will still require you to invest in the locksmith perk to help you pick advanced, expert, and master locks, but the lock-picking bobblehead will increase the size of the sweet spot for your bobby pins. So instead of having a microscopic area for picking master locks, you will now have a much larger area. And it's also worth mentioning that the lock-picking bobblehead has good synergy with the Tumblr Today magazines, which pretty much do the same thing. Now, to get the bobblehead, you'll need to go to Hickman's gallery and go to where Hickman is in the sewer area. Now, the bobblehead should be near one of the trash can lights right next to Hickman himself. As for the 5 different issues of Tumblr's Today, well, that's a little more involved. The first issue is located at Easy City Downs on the 2nd floor of the Commentator's building, and you'll have to use the bridges that are elevated above the racetrack to actually get there. The second issue is located in Fenton Street Sewer, and be sure to go through this entire area. And once you enter the final area with stairs that go up really high, look to your left for an archway, and the issue should be on a short set of drawers. The third issue is located in West Roxbury Station, and when looking for the third issue, be sure to keep an eye out for a skeleton couple on a bench holding some money and some day tripper. Then head toward an open door, and the issue should be located in one of the lockers. The fourth issue is located in Malden Center, and you'll need to take an elevator to the bottom level, but you will eventually enter a room where you can see raiders and Sims fighting each other. And upon entering this room, go through the red train car on your right, and then the issue should be on the shelf to your left. The final issue is located at Poseidon Energy Turbine in that shaft. Simply enter and follow the railing in this area to the bottom, and the issue should be located on a shelf within one of the metal rooms. While you may not necessarily need all of these, having both the bobblehead and a few issues of Tumblr's Today will make you far more effective at lockpicking. Number 5, the Wasteland Survival Guide, issue number 9. So without a doubt, the 9th issue of the Wasteland Survival Guide is one of the better magazines available. And what this does is it allows you to collect double the meat from each animal you kill. So instead of just getting 1 rat stag or bull rat meat, you will now get 2. And as you can imagine, this does wonders for survival mode, as it will pretty much ensure that you never run out of basic fueling items, and you will never run out of ways to combat your hunger. Just be sure to remember to cook all of the meat that you acquire from enemies to prevent contracting some kind of disease. The 9th issue of the Wasteland Survival Guide is located at Sunshine Tidings Co-op. You'll need to check the small shack on the hill near the 4 large canisters, and inside there should be 2 ghouls and a dead settler. And once you've dispatched the ghouls, the magazine should be right next to a red chest. Number 4, the bobblehead and the covert ops perk magazines. It should probably go without saying, but both of these items will help make you more difficult to detect by a certain percentage amount. Now, the sneak bobblehead provides a 10% bonus, while each covert ops magazine provides 4%, up to a total of 40% if you have all 10 of the covert ops magazines. This is actually pretty significant when you consider that the speed perk at rank 4 or higher will make you 50% harder to detect. So if you had all of the covert ops magazines, a sneak bobblehead, and your sneak perk was at rank 4 or higher, you would be 100% harder to detect, effectively making you 2 times more difficult to detect than normal. As for locations for all of these, there are a lot, but let's start with the bobblehead. Now, the bobblehead can be found in Dunwich Borders near the Station 4 terminal. And if you're unsure where this is the last terminal you will encounter before you enter that area where you can receive Kremva's tube. Now, issue 1 of the Covert Ops magazine is located at the Lexington switchboard that you can visit during trade track. Now, as soon as you enter what appears to be the switchboard proper, head up the stairs and the perk magazine should be on the desk. Issue 2 is located on the USS Constitution's interior on a small table in the captain's quarters, and you may have to unlock this area with a master lockpicking skill. Issue number 3 is located at the Federal Ration Stockpile. Now, this is in red turret quarters. Just make sure you go through the area, and it's at the very end of the area. Issue 4 is located at the abandoned shack in the glowing sea at the very bottom near an army chest. Issue 5 is located at Fort Strong in one of the offices to your right once you enter the building, and you'll need to unlock a door, but the perk magazine should be lying on a desk. Issue number 6 is located in Fort Hagen, and it's in the room with the bed you can sleep on just before you fight Kellogg. Issue number 7 is located at Libertalia near the top of the large ship. Don't actually enter the captain's quarters, as the perk magazine is on a platform just outside. Issue number 8 is located at the National Guard training yard. Now, you're going to need to obtain the keys to get through the first building, and once you do that, walk through the gated entrance into the second building, and then make your way through the second building until you come upon a room with a large hole in the middle. Then jump down the hole, go through a just go up the stairs to the centermost platform, and perk magazine should be up there. And finally, issue number 10 is at the USAF Satellite Station Olivia. Simply hack the first terminal that you see to open the left room, and the 10th issue should be right next to a menu. While that is a lot of locations, and it could be exhausting to do all of those things, the boost to your sneak skill is going to be significant. And if you are playing a stealth character, I would argue that having the sneak bobblehead as well as all of the Covert Ops magazines is essential. Number 3 is your special book. So there's a pretty good chance that you're aware of this magazine, as it can be acquired at the very beginning of Fallout 4. Upon returning to Sanctuary Hills, enter your house and go to Baby Sean's room, and this magazine or book will be right under the wooden piece of furniture next to Sean's crib. Now, what the Your Special magazine does is it allows the player to permanently boost any one of their special stats by just 1 point. So, in a certain sense, think of this like you would for all of the other special stat bobbleheads, except instead of being confined to one special stat, you can choose any special stat. While you are normally limited to a max of 10 for each stat, there are some exploits involving chems that allow you to use this magazine to boost a given special stat to 11. All you have to do is make sure that you've reached 10 in the given special stat that you want to boost. Then you're going to need to take a chem that has a corresponding debuff to the particular special stat that you're trying to boost. So, for example, if you're trying to boost strength to 11, what you need to do is find something like Day Tripper. You need to take it, then quickly walk over to the Your Special magazine, read it, boost your strength, and then wait for the effects to wear off, and you should have 11 strength. Now, in case you screw it up, I highly recommend that you save your game first before attempting this, but if you do manage to pull it off, it is possible to achieve 12 in this specific special stat by then acquiring the corresponding bobblehead. So if you try to boost strength to 11, if you require the strength bobblehead, you will get a special stat of 12. So if you want really high special stats, I highly recommend that you save all your bobbleheads and also save the Your Special magazine. Number 2, Scab issue number 5. So the 5th issue of the Scab magazine is amazing for melee players, as it has the potential to boost your strength and endurance the lower amount of caps you have. Now, if you have 10,000 caps or lower, you will gain +1 to both strength and endurance. If you have 1,000 caps or lower, you will gain +2 to both strength and endurance. And if you have lower than 100 caps, you will receive a +3 bonus to both strength and endurance. So as you have lower caps, the more powerful you become. While it can prove to be somewhat of a pain to keep your amount of caps low, provided your charisma is fairly high, you could start buying up cheap ammo to help kind of store your caps. Then when you need money, you simply sell ammo to obtain the caps you need to buy whatever it is that you want. Or you can really do this with any items. I just find that it works the best with things like 38 caliber ammo and 5mm ammo. But if you want this magazine, it's acquired in the Dry Rock Gulch employee area. Now, the magazine itself is located on a small table on top of the building in the middle of the compound. Now, you are going to have to restore power to get in here. However, if you're crafty, you can find some jumps to help you get inside before actually completing the DLC. So that's pretty cool. But ultimately, once you get in, look for some ramps, and they'll take you up to that central building, and you should be able to get the magazine pretty easily. Number 1, the Explosives Bubblehead and Stab issue number 4. So out of all of the weapon-based bubbleheads, the Explosives Bubblehead is by far the best of the bunch. And this is because it simply boosts explosive damage, which will consistently improve everything from explosive grenades, Batman or missile launchers, and even weapons with the explosive legendary weapon effects. In addition, the 4th issue of the Scab magazine from World also provides a similar buff. And for the sake of comparison between the two, the Explosives Bubblehead provides a 15% boost to explosive damage, while the 4th issue of Scab provides a 5% boost. Both of these items are really a must if you plan on using any explosive type weapons, and should provide you with an additional damage boost in conjunction with the Demolition Expert perk. And I would say if you plan on using the Demolition Expert perk, you're going to really want both the Explosive Bubblehead and the Scab issue number 4. As for the locations, the Explosive Bubblehead is located in the Sonic's Ironworks, and you'll need to defeat Slag, who is a main raider wearing power armor in this area. And once Slag and his followers are defeated, you should be able to find the Explosive Bubblehead right next to his chassis on a racket mount with some circuitry. And as for Scab issue number 4, it's available in the Grandchester Mystery Mansion from World and is located in the attic. Just be sure to look to your right as soon as you enter the attic. But alright guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, feel free to leave it. You're watching Final Religion. So like all other RPGs, Fallout 4 has its fair share of side quests that the player can do. Just like previous Fallout games, there are a great combination of eerie, fascinating, and goofy side quests that the player can undertake and receive various useful items. Today, I will be going over 10 of what I think are some of the best side quests in Fallout 4. Now, before we get into this video, I'm going to let you guys know that I intend to keep this video as spoiler-free as possible. This means that while I may discuss how to start some of the quests and some of the quest is about, and I may also discuss some of the rewards that you can get, I'm going to try to purposely be vague as to what you actually do in some of these quests, because I don't want to spoil it for you guys. Though in my defense, you've had about a year to not have Fallout 4 story spoiled for you. But without further ado, these will be the top 10 best side quests and side missions in Fallout 4, starting now. Number 10. Find the treasures of Jamaica Plain. Now, the argument could be made that this isn't so much of an official side quest and is more of an unmarked quest. However, I would say that like a regular side quest, this quest is totally optional and doesn't really contribute to the main plot at all. And it's also discovered in a similar way to many of the other side quests in the game, where you hear about it from various in-game NPCs and towns like Diamond City or Midnander. Jamaica Plain quest involves breaking into the Jamaica Plain town hall vault, and involves exploring the town to find various members of a group of people that had planned on breaking into the Jamaica Plain vault themselves. However, they were unfortunately killed by all of the ghouls in the area. Now, it's important to discover these people's bodies and loot the necessary passcodes off of their corpses. And once you do, you can go into the basement and disable the vast majority of the security that's protecting the vault's contents. And assuming you can get in, there is some valuable salvage like a microscope and a camera, and you can also get the unique baseball bat known as the 2076 World Series bat. This weapon has a unique special effect that has a chance to send enemies flying into the air when they're struck. Because this area does have a lot of security and there are a lot of things like tripwires and such, it's recommended that the player ultimately come here without a companion, or they tell their companion to stay while they're navigating some of the more difficult areas. Ultimately, going to Jamaica Plain and acquiring all of the stuff in the bank vault is worth it. Plus, if you're a melee character, I think you're going to like the 2076 World Series bat. Number 9, Devil's Due. So Devil's Due is a side quest that involves something mysterious going on at the Museum of Witchcraft. To start this quest, you can either go to the Museum of Witchcraft directly, or you can have an NPC inform you that something strange is happening at the museum, and this will also start the quest. Once you arrive outside, you can find the body of Private Hart, who informs you that a bunch of gunners entered into a contract with a robot butler in Garden City named Wellington. And from here, you're tasked with entering the basement, and as you make your way through this facility, you can encounter a death claw that you will have to kill. And once you defeat it, you can examine some of the bodies of the other dead gunners to find a specific item. You can either deliver it to Wellington, or you can return it to where it was originally located. Completing this quest results in the player receiving some experience points, caps, and you can receive a special crafting recipe and or the death claw gauntlets. To be honest with you though, I don't really think either specific item reward here is particularly amazing. I ultimately just like how this quest can play out depending on the player's choices. I also like the eerie vibe that you get while exploring the museum for the very first time, not knowing exactly what's happening upstairs. Overall, this is a good quest to check out once you start exploring the northeastern parts of Boston. Number 8, Trip to the Stars. Trip to the Stars is a quest that involves a returning faction from Fallout 2 known as the Hubologists. The Hubologist leader, Dara Hubble, enlists the player to gather 5 spacesuits from the Galactic Zone's Vault-Tec exhibit in Nuka World and return them to her. And once you've done this, you will accompany the Hubologists as they fight their way towards the Nuka World junkyard. And if the Hubologists survive, Dara Hubble will reward the player with the Hub's Alien Blaster, which is a unique version of the Alien Blaster from the base game that contains the lucky legendary weapon effects. And this effect allows you to kill your typical hits meter faster than normal, and all critical hits now deals double the damage than they otherwise would have. I like this particular quest just because it's goofy. The Hubologists also practice Hubology, which is sort of a spoof of Scientology from our world. Otherwise, most of the other side quests in Nuka World are collectathon quests. And that's not to say that the rewards you get from like theft in the stash or precious metals aren't worth it, but I tend to avoid these overbearing collectathon style quests. Just keep in mind that this quest requires Nuka World in order to experience. Number 7, Pikmin's Gift. I've always thought that this was a memorable quest for Fallout 4, not necessarily because of what you do in the quest itself, but more so for where the actual quest takes place. Pikmin's Gift takes place in the Pikmin's Gallery, which is the home of a serial killer that includes a bunch of dead raiders all over the place, as well as beings created with eerie and macabre paintings. And these bizarre paintings make this particular location worth visiting just for the spectacle of it all. Now, as for the quest itself, Pikmin's Gift is pretty straightforward. Upon entering the gallery, the player can loot a holotape that is called Message to Jack, and this will inform them about Pikmin. And ultimately, you have to travel through the area, and you'll eventually find Pikmin, and you can decide what you would like to do with them then. One of the big reasons that I would recommend that you do this quest is if you have a melee build and you want a really nice melee weapon. Depending on your choices, you can get the Pikmin's Blade, which is a combat knife with the wounding legendary weapon effect. And because of that, it is extremely powerful. I'd say the melee weapon is one dig. So the Big Dig is a side quest that involves Bobby No-Nose, Belle, and a robot with a drill apparatus named Sonya. In this quest, Bob is digging underground with Good Neighbor in an attempt to steal from the Diamond City strongroom. At the start of this quest, Bob asks you to help other workers dig, and you end up having to kill a bunch of violins. After that, he sends you to Diamond City Jail to recruit Mel. And once you've done that, you let Mel know about the job and he will join you. And then from there, you use Sonia to dig through the various walls to get to the Diamond City strongroom. However, as soon as you arrive at your destination, not everything is as it seems. Having a heist mission like this one is pretty cool in my opinion. And while I won't delve too much into spoiler territory, you have 3 different endings that you can choose from here. And completing the side quest under certain conditions allows the player to get a unique minigun called the Ashmaker. And while this gun isn't insanely powerful, it is a bit better than your standard minigun. You can also acquire Hancock as a companion this way. In fact, this quest has to be completed before Hancock can be included as a companion. And overall, I would say for that reason, you may want to do this particular quest. Number 5, Hole in the Wall. Now, Hole in the Wall is really part of a group of side quests that involve Vault 81. And these quests are Dependency, Here to Kitty, Short Stories, and the side quest named Vault 81, and of course, Hole in the Wall. Usually, you will need to complete Vault 81, which allows you to gain access to the vault, and then Here to Kitty before you can go and actually start this particular quest. Once you've started Hole in the Wall, you eventually discover that one of the child inhabitants of Vault 81, Austin Engel, has come down with a very serious disease as a result of being bitten by a mole rat. The player is ultimately tasked with exploring a secret portion of Vault 81 to see if there is a cure to the disease. And this quest is interesting because it explains some of the backstory and the original intentions that Vault-10 had for Vault 81. Without spoiling too much about Vault 81's backstory, I would just say that it's amazing that these residents have managed to survive as long as they have. For completing this side quest, you get the syringe rifle, which fires syringe ammo that can be used to apply various status effects depending on the syringes that are crafted at a chemistry workstation. Plus, you also get your own room in Vault 81, and Yuri as a companion. While it's not necessarily a part of the quest, it is worth coming to Vault 81 for some really good items like the Overseer's Garden. I highly recommend that you come here, you do all the quests related, and you also get the Overseer's Garden combat rifle. Number 4, The Secret of Cabin House. Just like the Hole in the Wall side quest, you could make the argument that this side quest is somewhat incomplete and should be included as a part of an entire quest line that involves several different side quests. Those side quests are Special Delivery, Imaging Takes a Mother, and The Secret of Cabin House. All of them involve this very opulent and extremely wealthy family known as the Cabin family. I don't want to spoil the story too much, but The Secret of Cabin House involves going to the Parsons State Asylum to figure out what's happened to the soldiers that are guarding the area. Upon reaching the location, you discover that the soldiers were wiped out by a group of raiders, and as you traverse the asylum, you eventually take an elevator down to the basement where you have to make a choice to either help Jack Cabot or not. As far as rewards go, you can either receive the Lorenzo's Artifact Gamma Gun, or you can get a supply of the mysterious serum. Both of these items are great and are well worth doing this particular quest for. Number 3, The Silver Shroud. So this side quest is pretty interesting. It involves cosplaying and or role-playing as the Silver Shroud. It's a fictional comic book superhero from the Fallen universe. You can start this quest in several different ways. You can either listen to the Silver Shroud radio to their Good Neighbor, or you can go directly to Kubrick's comics and get the Silver Shroud costume there. Once you've got the costume, you can talk to Ken Canoli, who will ask you to kill some people in the seats. And at some point, Kent will get captured, and it's up to you to save him as the Silver Shroud. And without spoiling too much more, all I will say is that as soon as you learn that Kent has been captured, I highly recommend that you save your game, because the parts after this can be extremely difficult to pull off correctly. The rewards for completing this quest are alright. You do get the Silver Shroud costume along with the uniquely colored silver submachine gun. Plus, depending on how you actually complete the quest, you can get the armor capabilities of the Silver Shroud uniform to be improved. I would say the best part about completing this quest is that you can get Silver Shroud dialogue options. And while they're only active while wearing the costume, these unique interactions can make replaying Fallout 4 just with the Silver Shroud costume worth it and pretty entertaining. And this even extends to some of the DLCs like Automatron, and I think you can also speak as the Silver Shroud in the world. I would say that if you're enjoying Fallout 4 and you want to do another playthrough, it might be worth it to complete this side quest for the new dialogue options. Number 2, Brain Dead. So the Fallout DLC has 2 side quests, and of the 2, I think Brain Dead is by far the best one. This quest is started when the player is approached by Crow, a mini-bot that asks the player if they are part of law enforcement, and to come to the Cliff's Edge Hotel to assist with solving the murder. As you traverse the area, you come across a vault known as Vault 1, where the player's goal is to solve the murder of Ezra Parker. To do this, you will have to ask the other Vault residents, or should I say Robo-Brains, questions about who killed who, what their motives were, and why. This vault is also unlike many of the other vaults in the Fallout franchise in the sense that it's a vault that is mostly filled with extremely wealthy people from before the war. In order to gain a sort of immortality, these people place their brains into a Robo-Brain chassis in an attempt to live forever. I also like this particular quest because it's sort of a spoof of a detective mystery. Even the sole survivor doesn't really take the entire situation super seriously, which is really refreshing compared to the overall tone of the DLC, which is relatively serious. That said, there was a controversy surrounding this quest where a modder claimed that Bethesda copied this mod called Odd Moves. Now, I haven't played the Odd Moves mod myself, but according to the wiki, it's also a murder mystery that shares similar design features, and both of the vaults are run by robots. Don't let that influence your outlook on this quest, though, because I think it's really good. Number 1, the last voyage of the USS Constitution. I would say that out of all of the side quests in the main game, the voyage of the USS Constitution is definitely one of the most memorable. This is both because of the location as well as some of the NPCs that you interact with. In order to start this particular quest, you'll need to go to the USS Constitution that's located just east of Bunker Hill. From there, you'll be approached by a robot that will allow you to meet Captain Ironsides, a sentry bot turned ship captain. Ironside will list you to find various parts to repair the ship's rockets, so the robot is controlling the USS Constitution to leave the area and set sail in the sea. At some point, you'll leave the ship to acquire a guidance jet, and this is where you can either choose to betray Ironsides or continue to help him. And depending on what you decide to do, the quest ends with the reward. There is at least one piece of item that you can get from doing this particular quest, and that is the broadsider, which is basically a portable naval cannon that shoots cannonballs. While the broadsider is weaker than the missile launcher in Batman, the ammo for it is much cheaper to buy, and it also weighs less in survival mode, making it a somewhat more practical option than either the missile launcher or Batman. That said, you may find that other weapons aren't much more ammo efficient. Ultimately, this is just another awesome quest that's really goofy, and I really like it. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time. And scorpions, mutated reptiles like deathclaws, and you also have other humans that you have to contend with that may be equipped with some of the most powerful weapons that the pre-war era had to offer. However, some places in Fallout 4 are more dangerous than others, and today I'd like to go over what I think are among some of the most dangerous areas, locations, and places in all of Fallout 4. Before we start, I'm going to go for some variety with these locations. I'm going to be including at least one area from each of the campaign DLCs, and I'm also going to try and include areas with different enemy types. So I will be going over the most dangerous gun location, or the most dangerous location you can find robot type enemies. With all this said, feel free to leave what you think is the most dangerous location or area in Fallout 4 in the comment section below. However, without further ado, these will be what I think are the top 8 most dangerous and interesting places and locations to visit in Fallout 4, starting now. Number 8, the castle. The castle is also known as Fort Independence. Independence and was the former headquarters of the Minutemen until it was taken over by Mirelurk sometime in the 2040s. Now, there is a good chance that you've probably been here before, as you do come here during one of the Minutemen quests known as Taking Independence. Now, during this quest, you will have the option to assault the castle along with other Minutemen. While you may not need a group to help you at higher levels, and provided that you don't have power armor, you may find that the massive numbers of both Mirelurk Spawn, and Mirelurk Queen can make taking this settlement fairly difficult. The biggest threat here is that Mirelurk Queen, and while Mirelurk Queens can be taken out relatively easily with practice, they do have nasty poison projectile-based attacks, and they are heavily armored. And it's also worth mentioning that Mirelurks in general can be particularly dangerous to melee players, as most melee weapons simply bounce off of the Mirelurk shell. While I would say that this area is dangerous, as long as you are prepared, I don't think you're going to have an insanely difficult time trying to take the castle. Number 7, Northwood Ridge Quarry from the Far Harbor DLC. Now, to be honest, it was actually really hard to pick just one area from the Far Harbor DLC. The fact is, the entire island of Far Harbor is home to a lot of really powerful creatures like giant hermit crabs, anglers, swamp crawlers, and gulpers, who all seemingly have high damage attacks, and all of which also tend to have a lot of health. Out of all of the specific locations, I would say Northwood Ridge Quarry can be a major problem if your build has a difficult time handling Mirelurks. Obviously, pure melee builds that make use of weapons like Pigment's Gift or the Throat Slicer from the Nuka DLC are going to have some issues, as most of your attacks will bounce off of the enemy's shells. Not to mention that you can encounter a Mirelurk Queen in this location like you can in the castle. Ultimately, the whole island of Far Harbor is pretty treacherous, as many of the enemies are fairly difficult and tend to scale with the player's level. Number 6, Big John Salvage. Super mutants in Fallout 4 are known for their fairly high health, especially at higher levels. In my mind, this can make them fairly daunting when you're fighting more than 5 of them at once, and when it comes to fairly large concentrations of super mutants as well as mutant hounds, Big John Salvage tends to be one of the more populated areas. And while you won't encounter any behemoths in this location, this area can prove to be fairly treacherous when you start adding in these super mutant suiciders and the high-level super mutant warlords that have over 1,500 health. Thankfully, though, the super mutants at Big John Salvage don't wield Batmans, though I believe it is possible to encounter super mutants wielding missile launchers or miniguns. So depending on what difficulty you're playing, it's safe to say that you're probably going to want to bring some power armor and try to be careful while visiting this area. And while Big John Salvage isn't the most dangerous place in the game, the super mutants here can prove to be pretty tough at high levels. And if these super mutants have energy weapons, it may not matter how much damage resistance you have. Number 5, Libertalia. So, Libertalia is one of the more fascinating raider encampments in Fallout 4. Unlike most raider encampments, which are located in downtown Boston or out in the more rural areas of the Commonwealth, Libertalia is located out on the water and is a settlement that is almost entirely consisted of old boats that have been tethered together into a settlement. And as you can probably imagine, you may not want to wear power armor while visiting this place. Like many areas that are in the more northeastern part of the Commonwealth, Libertalia is host to tougher enemies that you might have seen in many of Fallout 4's other areas. And it's also worth mentioning that the raiders at Libertalia have access to a Fat Man, which can ultimately be the end of you if you're not careful. Still, you will end up coming here during the main quest during synth retention, and it's also worth coming here for the late Bucel Tarib combat shotgun, even if you end up selling it later on. So I would say if you do go to Libertalia, try to dodge the Fat Man and avoid falling in the water if you are wearing power armor. Number 4, the Mechanist Slayer. So, the Mechanist Slayer is a fairly interesting location that was added with the Automatron DLC. What I will say without spoiling too much is that the Mechanist Slayer is mostly a labyrinth filled with killer robots and various traps. Some of these traps are mildly dangerous, but as long as you move smartly, you should be able to disable most of them as you go. What I think actually makes the Mechanist layer somewhat dangerous is the fact that most of the area is somewhat dark, making it difficult to see and view legendary automatrons that are littered throughout the area. While most of the generic automatron enemies aren't really too bad, the issue is that legendary automatrons have a tendency to detonate upon their death. If the player doesn't have enough health, these nuclear blasts can actually end up killing you, and this can be extremely frustrating in survival mode, especially if you're playing a pure melee build, which will guarantee that you'll be close to the automatrons as they die. I'd recommend you at least use some kind of gun while traversing this area. This way, you can kill the legendary enemies and avoid the detonations. Still, one can catch you off guard, making this area pretty dangerous. Number 3, the glowing sea. So this one is fairly obvious, but the glowing sea as a whole is a constant rad storm, and it's highly advised that you wear either a hazmat suit or power armor while traversing this area. Otherwise, depending on your level of rad resistance, you may end up succumbing to all of the radiation. The glowing sea is also host to a lot of dangerous creatures as well. Some areas will contain things like bloatflies or ghouls, but it's not uncommon to come across rat scorpions or even death claws in some of the more harsh areas. As I'm sure you're aware, these enemies can prove to be very dangerous, as both tend to have high resistances and are also capable of dealing a significant amount of damage to the player. Other than during certain parts of the main quest, there isn't really much reason to come out here. Still, there are some interesting areas to explore, like an abandoned intelligence bunker, a Children of Adam settlement, as well as an old missile silo. But if you are looking for a dangerous place to visit in Fallout 4, I would say the glowing sea is a must. Number 2, Nuka Town, USA. While certain creatures in Nuka World, like cave crickets, can be very dangerous, I would say that Nuka Town, USA is definitely one of the more dangerous locations to visit from the Nuka World DLC. Thankfully, unlike most of the other areas on this list, the local raiders here aren't immediately hostile, and yes, while they will shoot at you as you run through the Nuka World gauntlet, they will not attack you as long as you are the overboss. However, the player can start a side quest called Open Season, where they are asked to wipe out the raider gangs at Nuka World and help free the local settlers. And if the player decides to do this, they will begin to realize that this is actually a relatively daunting task, because the Nuka World raiders have access to some pretty potent weaponry and armor. Not to mention that most of the enemies here are over level 30, which makes them even more difficult. Having to fight all 3 games at once by yourself can either cost a lot of stim packs and multiple power armor repairs, or in survival mode, it can lead to a quick death. Number 1, Quincy Ruins. The southern part of Fallout 4's map generally tends to have tougher enemies and hopefully ends up being pretty dangerous for that reason. However, if you're looking for a very dangerous area to visit from the vanilla game, I think that one of the more dangerous human encampments just so happens to be Quincy Ruins. By the time you visit Quincy, you will come to discover that the area is completely taken over by gunners. In fact, 3 gunner leaders reside in this area. 2 of them have power armor equipped, while the other has a fat man or a missile launcher. Even worse, many of the local gunners are located high up on top of buildings, which can make them very difficult to kill as you enter this location. And since these enemies are gunners after all, they have access to a lot of high-end equipment like plasma rifles, rippers, assault rifles, and combat arms.
Shit. That
It's also
sucks.
mentioning that there just seems to be a crap ton of gunners here. And while I haven't specifically counted, I'd say that there are at least 20 to 30 of them. And while this isn't as much as Nuka Town, USA, it's still quite a number of NPCs. And last I checked, none of the Nuka World raiders were equipped with power armor, Batmans, and have the ability to attack you from the tops of the buildings. So, if you ask me, I think Quincy Ruins is the most dangerous location in Fallout 4. But alright guys, I think that's going to wrap up. What's up guys, this is Violent Turbine. Today I wanted to go over what I think are among some of the worst guns and weapons in Fallout 4. Now before we start, this video is a remake of a video that I made almost 3 years ago that I wanted to go ahead and update. My old video doesn't take into account a lot of the newer weapons that were added through DLC, and there were also a lot of other items that I wanted to include, but simply didn't. So I think you'll find that if you enjoyed my last top 10 worst weapons in Fallout 4 video, you'll certainly enjoy this particular video as well, as it is greatly reworked from the original. However, without further ado, these will be 10 of what I think are among the worst weapons in Fallout 4, starting now. Number 10, the meat hook. When it comes to unarmed weapons, you don't really have a lot of choices, so it's sort of a shame that you would come across an awful one like the meat hook from the Bar Harbor DLC. While I suppose it's not the weakest unarmed weapon in the entire game, the problem with the meat hook is that it actually has decent base damage, however it lacks any serious upgrade potential. Compared to other unarmed weapons like the Power Fist, which has a variety of interesting upgrades that greatly boost damage, or even compared to things like the Deathclaw Gauntlet or Boxing Glove, which have upgrades that can improve those weapons' damage potential by around 100%, the meat hook is stuck with an upgrade that seems to improve base damage by a measly 25% at best. Plus, when you consider that this is a DLC weapon and is likely not going to be obtained until the player has either beaten the game or after the player has at least reached level 15 or higher, you kind of have to wonder exactly who this weapon is for. Maybe it would be great as a potential early game weapon, however, since you can't even obtain this thing until much later on, you have to wonder what the point of it actually is. If you ask me, it's really a shame because a lot of the other weapons that were added with the Bar Harbor DLC are quite good, and if this weapon does somehow end up returning in a future game, I just hope that the upgrade path is improved. Number 9, the Pipe Revolver. While pipe weapons on the whole get a bad rap, one of the things that's nice about them is their flexibility. After all, you can seemingly convert them from pistols to rifles, or you can even change the type of ammo that they use. With this said though, I think there is one pipe weapon that is truly awful, and that is the Pipe Revolver. While the Pipe Revolver may possess some of the flexibility we might associate with other pipe weapons, its upgrades end up being weaker and have higher perk requirements than similar weapons. Case in point, a fully upgraded regular pipe gun that fires 38 caliber ammo will deal 19 damage per shot and require a gun nut perk rank of 2 to craft, while a 38 receiver for the Pipe Revolver deals 18 damage per shot and requires a gun nut perk rank of 3 to craft. A similar thing could be said for the Pipe Bolt Action Rifle, which is capable of more than 50 damage per shot and only requires a gun nut perk rank of 2 to craft, and a 308 receiver for the Pipe Revolver only deals 42 damage per shot and of course requires a gun nut perk rank of 3 to craft. The only reason I could think of that you would want to use the Pipe Revolver is if you were a pistol user and you wanted to use 45 caliber ammo. However, for what you will be paying in ammo costs, I think you'll find that something like the 44 pistol or even a pipe bolt action pistol would be far more practical. Number 8, the salvaged Assaultron head. So the Automatron DLC added a fair number of interesting weapons. While some of them are fairly good, like the Mr. Hank Buzzblade, and others are fairly decent, like the Castle Rifle, I've got to say that the Assaultron weapons are both pretty bad. However, while the Assaultron blade is just generally made obsolete by other weapons, the salvaged Assaultron head is what is really disappointing. After all, the Assaultrons that the player can encounter in the game have this really deadly charged beam attack that just sustains for several seconds, and I think you have to admit that the prospect of doing something like that with an in-game weapon would actually be really cool. Unfortunately for us though, what we ultimately got was a laser musket in physical form that could deal rad damage to the player if they don't have enough rad resistance. While I suppose the salvaged Assaultron head is stronger than the laser musket, I think its lack of upgrades definitely leaves something to be desired. After all, laser musket's damage can be increased slightly, and you can get a 6 crank capacitor, which outstrips the salvaged Assaultron head's 5 cranks. Plus, when you consider that the laser musket doesn't inflict rad damage on the player, I've got to say that the laser musket is just the better choice. I guess if this weapon manages
file too. Damn it.
return in any future games. Hopefully it's more like the Assaultron head laser that we all know and sort of feel. Number 7, the Syringer. One of the cool things about Skyrim compared to Fallout 4 was a lot of the special powers and abilities that the player could take advantage of. For example, the ability to frenzy or paralyze enemies with various magic spells, potions, or enchanted weapons was a pretty cool effect and helped make the game's combat feel a lot more dynamic and interesting. Bethesda tried to incorporate a lot of these interesting mechanics and abilities into Fallout 4 with the Syringer, and while I think this wasn't necessarily a bad idea, the execution of this idea could have been a lot better. For starters, a lot of the components that are required to craft specific syringes are specific junk items rather than broken down junk resources. Instead of needing something like adhesive, steel, and acid to craft a syringe that deals damage, the player would need relatively obscure junk items like a rad scorpion stinger, antifreeze bottle, or even pencils to just craft certain items. Even in the case of syringes that are good, like the Berserk syringe or a Dangerous syringe, the problem with these is the crafting components required are very obscure and not readily obtainable. And if they were more obtainable, I think that the syringer may actually be a lot more useful. I would really like to see the syringer return in future installments. However, I do think that the syringes need to be correct. Number 6, the walking cane. Along with other good weapons from Bethesda like the rolling pin, whirlpool, and board, the walking cane seems to be part of a long lineage of god-awful melee weapons throughout the Fallout series. And while I must admit that it's pretty funny to see a raider charging me with something like a rolling pin or a walking cane, these are weapons that I would advise the player to avoid. When it comes to the walking cane in particular, it somehow manages to be worse than the rolling pin, mostly due to the upgrades that are available for it and its broken standing. After all, at 4 strength and 4 perks, the walking cane is capable of dealing easily 14 damage, and after upgrades, the walking cane is only dealing about 16 damage. Compared to other melee weapons with a medium attack speed, like the Chinese officer sword, machete, or shish kebab, these weapons not only sport higher base damage on average, but they also benefit more from actually being upgraded. Even the rolling
like my top 4 on this team. Ooh, Lucas Raymond's up here too. Nice. Well done, Fred. Get up there.
Which makes you wonder why anyone would even use a walking cane in the first place. Ultimately, I don't think it's really controversial that the walking cane is bad, and I'm sure that, like me, you two have grown when you come upon a legendary variant of this weapon. Number 5. Anything 50 caliber. In case you weren't aware, 50 caliber weapons are straight up terrible in Fallout 4. Why? Well,
oh no, that is not good.
Should I say 50 caliber receivers for weapons, is that they more often than not don't deal enough damage to make the price of the ammo worth it. For example, a fully upgraded 308 hunting rifle deals about 25 damage, while a 50 caliber variant deals 64 damage per shot. Also, a fully upgraded 308 caliber pipe bolt-action rifle or pistol deals about 51 damage per shot compared to the 59 damage per shot of its 50 caliber version. So all the upgrade to 50 caliber really does is provide you with the damage increase of about 8 to 9 points, which I would say is pretty insignificant. Additionally, 50 caliber bullets themselves cost 4 bottle caps per round, which compared to 3 bottle caps per round for a 308 caliber. And if you happen to play in survival mode, 50 caliber bullets weigh almost twice as much as 308 caliber. And with these things in mind, you really have to wonder whether the damage increase compared to 308 caliber and the increase in both ammo cost and ammo weight is really worth it. While 50 caliber weapons aren't the worst thing on this list, they're still pretty bad and should definitely be avoided by all Fallout 4 players. Number 4, the submachine gun. While this weapon gets some love because it's associated with the unique spray for SMG, I recommend that you avoid this weapon any other time you see it, as it is quite possibly one of the worst weapons in the game. To give you some idea, the submachine gun is about on par with a fully upgraded automatic pipe rifle in terms of damage and fire rate. And while that may not sound like much of a problem at first, you have to consider that the pipe rifle is a beginner's automatic weapon, while the submachine gun is something that's meant to be of much higher quality. After all, the submachine gun is using 45 caliber ammo, which is ammo that costs roughly 3 times as much as 38 caliber ammo. With this in mind, you may actually find that a pipe rifle with the explosive legendary effects may actually end up being better than a spray and pray if you can manage to find one. After all, 38 caliber ammo is a lot cheaper, and the damage for the explosive legendary effect is going to be the same. With that said, the spray and pray would have the advantage of having a superior magazine size, which would mean that you're potentially reloading less often. However, again, you're still firing ammo that costs 3 charge as well. Ultimately, the ammo this weapon uses is what really hurts it. In fact, if this weapon was capable of using 38 caliber, 5mm, or 10mm ammo, it might actually be more useful, as those ammo types tend to be much cheaper and are also much lighter in survival mode. Hopefully, the submachine gun can return in a future Fallout game and be more practical. Number 3, the Flamer. When it comes to heavy weapons in Fallout 4, I think it's fairly safe to say that the Flamer is quite possibly one of, if not the worst one available. While there are some other stinkers out there like the Batman Merge Launcher or even the Junk Jets, at least those weapons have upgrades that can either revert it to something that's actually quite good, or they have upgrades that don't actually end up making the weapon worse. Surprisingly, the Flamer has upgrades that make it worse. For example, let's say you want to improve the weapon's damage. In order to do so, you have to install the napalm upgrade, which greatly increases the weapon's weight. Alternatively, you can install a new nozzle to further upgrade the flamer's damage. However, this will usually decrease the flamer's range, meaning that you will have to be closer to the enemy than you would otherwise need to be. Plus, when you consider that these damage increases total up to no more than 8 points, you really have to wonder if the drastic increases in weight and decreased range is really worth it on a weapon that already has fairly low base damage. The only flamer that I would say is worth it in Fallout 4 is the Sergeant Ash flamer that's available in the Far Harbor DLC, and this is mostly because of its unique echo effect, which makes it great against creatures. Otherwise, I think you'll find that between the lousy base damage, double-edged upgrades, and the relative obscurity of this weapon out in the wild, it's just impractical. And if you ask me, it's kind of a shame because the Flamer was actually a fairly decent weapon in previous titles. Number 2, the Acid Soaker. I've got to admit that the Nuka World DLC added a lot of great new weapons. After all, things like the Western Revolver, Handmade Rifle, the Psycho Blade, Rocket Bat, and Rocket Sledgehammer are all truly amazing weapons. However, it's worth mentioning that the Nuka World DLC isn't without its fair share of stinkers, like the County Whacker and Acid Soaker, and of the two, I've got to say that the Acid Soaker is quite possibly one of the worst implemented weapons in the game. While the premise behind the Acid Soaker is actually quite good, after all, it's a poison weapon that deals damage over time and also reduces damage resistance of enemies, the problem is that the Acid Soaker's ammo is horrendously expensive to craft. After all, you will need 20 acid, 2 adhesive, and 8 glass just to craft one shot for the Acid Soaker, making it very impractical to actually use. Especially when you consider that you'll need 400 acid, 40 adhesive, and 160 glass just to craft one full magazine. Otherwise, the Acid Soaker suffers from low base damage, a non-existent upgrade path, and incompatibility with most weapon-based perks. So, you can't even improve the weapon's damage capabilities in any real significant way. It's a shame that the Acid Soaker was so poorly implemented, because I think if it did have a solid upgrade path, better base damage, and ammo that was actually practical to craft, the weapon could potentially be a lot of fun to use, especially to weaken the damage resistance of some of this game's tougher enemies. It is what it is, but I do have to admit that I wish this weapon was a lot better. Number 1, the Homing Beacon. Now there's a chance that you may not have even heard of this weapon, but it's a grenade that can be obtained by the player after completing the Here There Be Monsters side quest on the Yankee submarine that's just up the coast of Boston. What this thing supposedly does is fire a nuke from the Yankee submarine that can be used to damage enemies. However, as you might expect, this weapon is plagued with numerous problems. It might weapon, and it may take a while before the explosion actually occurs, making you wonder why you even picked it up in the first place. There also appears to be some type of cooldown that occurs while using this thing. Unlike a lot of other grenades that you can throw repeatedly for better damage, the Homing Beacon has a cooldown period which can definitely frustrate some players. However, I think the biggest problem with this item is how limited these things are. Upon completing the side quest, the player only receives 3 of these, meaning that you can only use these things 3 times, provided that you don't spawn yourself some more with contra commands. And when you consider that this item can only be used outdoors and the nukes themselves would potentially collide with buildings, you have to wonder what the point of this thing even was. While I do have to admit that it is a pretty cool idea for a weapon, I'd rather just use a regular grenade. Alright guys, that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a like and also feel free to leave. You're watching Final Attunement Gaming. What's up guys? So today I want to discuss what I think is the best faction in Stage 4 sideways in Fallout 4. I'm going to be discussing the various firms that join the organization, but mostly a quasi-tactical based perspective for survival. While I will mention the morality of each of the factions, I will be recommending these factions mostly based on the perks that they provide. I will also be including the major DLC factions from both the Far Harbor and the Nuka World DLC as well. And before we get into this video, it's important to mention that to a certain extent, one faction may or may not be the best for your playstyle. One faction might provide better perks and weapons and armor for how you play the game, while the other faction might not. You may also decide to pick a certain faction based on how you
Oh my god, nice comeback! Holy shit, that's a lot of goals!
My choices here because I believe these factions to be the best choices for the easiest time to survive. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the vanilla game factions. Just to warn you, I might surprise you with my recommendation. So from Fallout 4's vanilla game, you have the Brotherhood of Steel, the Minutemen, the Institute, and the Railroad. The Brotherhood provides the player with a vertical signal grenade earlier on than the Railroad does, which is going to allow you to fast travel in survival difficulty. However, if you're planning on siding with another faction later on, you can take advantage of the Brotherhood of Steel until towards like the end of the game. You can also join the Minutemen, do the Minutemen ending, and still have access to Brotherhoods. The Brotherhood also allows you to obtain 60 armor fairly early, and while you don't have very many Brotherhood settlements, you can always use the Minutemen or the Nuka World Raiders for settlement building. And another nice thing about the Brotherhood is that you get access to the 60 armor pieces by completing your side quests, and if you go far enough into their quest line, you can get a free T60 medic pump and a T60 jetpack. Both of these are nice if you don't have a high science perk. You can also get the X111 compound, which will instantly heal rad in survival mode and can be quite useful if you're in a pinch. The Brotherhood does have its downsides though. Many of the perks I've mentioned can be used before you have to ally with a specific faction for the end of the game. So for example, Vertebrates can be used as long as you don't make the Brotherhood hostile. Plus the factions Union Paladin Advance ends up leaving the Brotherhood of Steel during the Blind Betrayal side quest mission. So if you side with the Brotherhood towards the end of the game, you lose your faction companion. Some of the unique items that you get later on aren't as amazing, and a lot of the good Brotherhood uniques are acquired upon joining their faction. So for example, something like the Righteous Authority's laser rifle is going to be better than the Sentinel's plasma caster. The thing is that the instigating effect on the Sentinel's plasma caster would work better on a silenced weapon as opposed to being on a plasma caster. And the plasma caster will probably benefit from like a...
Dude, the rest is on fucking fire right now, dude. Wow, he actually scored a hat trick too. Okay, I'll take that.
As it is fairly secure. Then there is the Commonwealth Minutemen. Within the first hour of the game, the Minutemen's first quest provides you with access to T-45 power armor. While this is the weakest of the standard power armor models, it's useful for your first couple of levels. And assuming you know where all the using cores are early on, I can see you easily using this armor until level 13 or so, when T-51 becomes available. Another nice perk of the Minutemen is their artillery cannons and settlements. The nice thing is that both of these can be acquired regardless of what ending you ultimately choose, and they are some of the Minutemen's most common features. One key thing about the Minutemen, though, is Preston Guardian's companion. Provided you equip him with better weapons and armor, he actually has one of the better companion perks in the game, and it is a perk called United Stand, and it boosts damage resistance by plus 20, which isn't that great, but it allows you to deal an additional 20% damage when you are quote-unquote outnumbered, and this is defined by the game as having 3 or more opponents fight you at once. So it might be worth it for you to max out this institute. The problem with the Minutemen is that you decide to institute Brotherhood or Railroad and receive most, if not all, of the benefits that the Minutemen provide. The Minutemen also provide a limited set of essential weapons for armor requests and vendors. And for this reason, it might actually be a good idea to release allies to the Minutemen if possible, but not totally complete their quest line. I would say once you get the castle, you should attempt to use one of the other 3 factions. There's also the Institute. The Institute allows the player to travel from anywhere in the Commonwealth back to the Institute. Now, on the one hand, this ability is quite nice, because it allows you to travel from a very central location on the map. Unfortunately, the Institute's teleporter doesn't allow you to fast travel anywhere on the map, like you sort of can with Brotherhood or Railroad vertical. This is a shame, as having the ability to teleport anywhere would make the Institute a phenomenal choice for a faction. Another issue that I have with the Institute is their faction companion X688. While he definitely looks cool, his companion perk at max affinity is pretty weak. Shield harmonics boosts energy resistance by plus 1. You'll find that this is almost negligible depending on how you use the character. Ultimately, I would say this companion perk is among one of the least ideal perks in Fallout 4. The Institute is also not a settlement-based faction, so you've also got to consider that you're going to have to keep the Minutemen around for that as well. The Institute ending also wipes out the Brotherhood and Railroad, and that is a guarantee. But you also have the potential to wipe out the Minutemen too. And while this may be cool from a roleplay perspective, I ultimately think preserving the Brotherhood or Railroad is going to be more useful, especially if you're concerned with the safer form of travel. Plus, you still get the Minutemen with both of those factions around, which may not have the opportunity to get you shows. And finally, there's the Railroad. The Railroad eventually acquires the Vertibird signal grenade, however, it is after their version of nuclear options. So once you take out the Institute and the Brotherhood of Steel, you will get access to their Vertibird signal grenade. Presumably, you could continue to use Brotherhood Vertibirds until you full stealth weapons, like the Deliverer, and you can also buy the Tinkerton Special if you're so inclined to the armor rating of various pieces of clothing.